The Service Paradox: How Clearing Your Conflict Better Serves Others. A conversation with Dana Garnett. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, welcome back to LMIPodcast, where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics to educate professionals and everyday people. Today we have Dana Garnett, and she's here to talk about professionals and how they can resolve the conflicts in their own lives to make sure that they are doing their best work for the people who come to them who need their conflicts resolved. And so, Dana, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mac. Thank you very much. Appreciate that introduction.
Yes, thank you. And I know we met maybe 3 years ago. I believe it was in the Woodlands. And I think I met you again in San Antonio a year later, because you've been a speaker professionally for the Texas Association of Mediators, because you're a credentialed mediator yourself. You're a conflict strategist, a conflict coach. And so you're pretty well known throughout this state and internationally, really, when you speak about these topics of conflict resolution. So it's good to see you again after a couple years, and welcome to the LMI podcast. And so today you're going to share with us, some ideas on how to make sure that we're not bringing on our own baggage into the mediation space, not just mediation, but conflict resolution in general. But let's get to know you a little bit. I'm going to share your website on my screen, but can you give us in the audience a quick little bio about yourself and just to introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. Like you said, today I am more of what I call a conflict resolution strategist and conflict coaching. I still do mediate cases, divorces, and civil cases, but I've gotten more and more into coaching. And it actually stems from my own personal experience. My quick story is public accounting, CPA, auditor, turned internal auditor with the Coca-Cola Company internationally. Early retired myself at one point, became an expatriate trailing spouse. Through my work and personal life, have lived many places in the world. And one of the place we were living for about 7 years was Bangkok, Thailand, which I learned a lot about mindfulness, which was fascinating. I did not know I'd be needing that later in life. But that's when my 20-year marriage fell apart. And we went through a very bad divorce, very highly contested, very angry with each other, very costly. And nearly $300,000 spent, $270 on legal fees and 30 on therapy. I came out of it really just feeling deflated, and was talking to someone who was a mediator and asked me how my experience was. And I just said it was miserable. I felt vulnerable and bullied. And I was pointing the finger, a bit to everybody else. Right. And I just wish people wouldn't have to suffer this way. I wish I could do something to prevent what I had gone through, for others. And he just calmly said, well, why don't you become a mediator and do it better? And I said, well, I'm not a lawyer, because we'd had an attorney as a mediator. And he said, you don't have to be an attorney. And I didn't know that. So within 6 weeks of that conversation, I was enrolled in my first graduate course at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and ended up getting a master's in dispute resolution. Along the way, I took a course called the Neuroscience of Conflict, and I was blown away I was fascinated how we are neurologically wired, and did a deeper dive and got certified as a trainer in other modalities around social emotional intelligence skills. And I was able to, what I discovered was all those years I thought I was, in conflict with other people and it was their fault, or they didn't appreciate me. I was really contributing to my own misery, and I just didn't know it. So when I learned how to process on this cathartic experience and became a mediator about halfway through, and this would have been about 18 months after my divorce decree had been filed, I was cleared of everything. I mean, I was able to be over my divorce. I call it the divorce continuum or the conflict continuum. You're just either just facing it, or you're embroiled in the middle of it, or it's legally over, but you're not. And that kind of stress, resentment, anger, whatever that residual is, like that settlement, you settle, but it's not real resolution, that can carry over or tends to in new personal relationships. If it's been a business breakup, a civil case, a new business partnership, and you wonder why the same things keep happening, why the same blowups keep happening. And so when I discovered how to clear the conflict for myself, it put me on a new path. And I began to see, and I began to judge less, or I should not judge anymore, anybody who hadn't done their own emotional work, right? It's like, well, I've grown, why can't you? That also creates conflict. So I started showing up just me from a new place. And all the conflicts that I'd had in my life before began to melt away. Now, it doesn't mean that life doesn't throw us something new, right? I've learned how to dance with conflict going forward. And that's where the coaching comes in. That's where the training comes in. I have an online program
Mhm.
called Resolving Family and Business Conflict that I take business owners through, leadership teams, but I also take professionals through, attorneys, CPAs, trustees, to help them deal with whatever in their lives that might get triggered, or any conflict that they have that might help, or might prevent them from being able to be really objective, that inherent bias that we struggle with sometimes, to really show up completely present for your clients, completely present for those parties. And the knock-on effect is we live longer and healthier and happier because we have less cortisol in our system that's just churning under the radar. We've got less stress that we're dealing with, and we can focus our energy in our lives on what matters most.
Yeah, no,
That's the story.
no, well said. If anyone ever takes all the videos we've ever done on this podcast and then put it into AI and then search for the word cortisol, you will not believe how many times that stress, what is it, stress hormone, has come up, because that is then the manifestation of so many negatives, in our lives, right? That there is a physical side to the stress that we deal with because of conflict in our lives. And so you're literally saving lives when you are in this business, literally, and you're
Yes.
adding years to people's lives because stress kills. And so if you can, mediate and help people resolve conflict, but also transform lives, not just mediate and then let them walk away with you know, something did not completely clear up, but actually resolve the issue and they can be transformed in
Yes.
their day-to-day lives. I think you're doing, God's work. So
Thank
thank you for all
Thank
of it.
you. And may I say, I love what you just said, because we are saving lives, right?
Yeah.
Why not save our own along with it? Why not be able to clear whatever in our lives has happened? I mean, I've had mediators tell me, I don't do family cases because I get triggered, but I do civil cases. And this may ruffle some feathers, but it's like, well, mediation or conflict is all about emotion.
Yeah.
And so if you're avoiding one kind of case but doing another, whatever would have been triggering you in those family cases, those still may come up. You may not even be aware that there's some inherent bias there that you're taking into other cases. But more than that, do yourself a favor, right? Why not clear those things so you can mediate any kind of case?
Exactly.
That you can take on. I had a criminal defense attorney had to stand in for his law partner one time on a mediation, and his law partner had the flu, but the law partner that had the flu is the divorce mediator. I'm sorry, the divorce attorney. And so when I met this guy, first thing he said was, "Look, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I hate doing divorce cases." I said, "Why?" He goes, "They're just so stressful." And I said, "I'm sorry,
Criminal defense,
you're a
exactly.
criminal defense attorney." He goes, "No, you don't get it. There's too much emotion here for me." And we went 11 hours that day. They did settle. Everything worked out well.
Yeah.
But the whole time, I mean, at one point I walked into to their room and he was on this couch like, "Oh God, when is this going to be over?" And I kept popping in going, "Okay, next thing, next thing." And he looked at me and he finally said, this is about the 10th hour. He said, "I'm sorry. You're just like the Energizer Bunny. You're popping in here with all this energy and stuff. How do you do that?" I said, "Oh, that." I said, "Well, we don't have time to explain it, but I know how to renew my energy in a way that helps me stay present for you, your clients, the other parties. And it also helps me. And he goes, wow, I need a taste of that. And that's when I started thinking, ooh, what if, you know, this could help the people involved in serving,
Yeah.
clients and
Yeah.
mediators serving parties. So anyway, people have just told me these things, in the past. And so,
Yeah.
I
Well,
just know all those needs.
speaking of then taking care of the professionals, recently you were a speaker at the Independent Trustee Alliance,
Yes,
and I'll share my screen. But this was just last week, and so when you were there, are you able to see my screen?
I am. Yes, I see it. Yeah,
Okay.
it was the National Trustee event. Yes. They have
Yes.
an annual conference every year.
Yes. And so these were some professionals you were, helping. Can you just touch a little bit about what you told them that might then, help other professionals listening out there?
Absolutely. My talk was entitled "The Transformative Trustee: How it only takes one person to shift family dynamics and preserve wealth." And the Independent Trustee Alliance, just as a note, is a really fascinating association because it's got a mix of any professional that touches estates or trusts. So independent trustees are private trustees that people hire to oversee their estate, right? But then you have estate attorneys who also are part of trusts and estates. You've got caregivers that people need. You've got risk managers for insurance, financial advisors, mediators. So it's an association of professionals that support trusts and estates. So my talk was it was not necessarily directed to trustees. It was everybody in the space there. There are professionals who serve in this regard, but the idea is that for this particular group, I've had a lot of people come to me saying we've got family issues within the trust, beneficiaries fighting with each other, or someone not happy that an independent trustee was appointed as the trustee, and not them, right? Because the benefactor chose an independent person over somebody perhaps in the family.
Yeah.
And so there's already conflict there. And I've had people come to me and say, can you come talk to the family? Can you help resolve this conflict? Because my concern is it's going to get out of hand and it's going to cost not only dollars, right, and assets trying to fight this perhaps in court, but also they're worried about the aging members of the family and the stress, getting back to stress, right, the health effect on them, and the relationships. Trustees care about how these, families are enacting, and yet they're not really, it's not their role to try to resolve the conflict. But what I'll tell them is, you could bring me in for a day to help facilitate. But if this has been going on for decades, which often it has, it's not going to, talking to somebody or helping to facilitate in a day is not going to clear up everything. Also, if they're not really happy with or don't see you as somebody they would want as trustee, anybody you bring in, they're not going to be really buying in on to start. And lastly, if they're not asking for help or if they don't even see there's a problem, um, then they're not going to be open to it. However, I can work with you as the trustee, or I can work with you as the estate attorney or as the financial advisor if you're witnessing conflict within your clients' families, right?
Yeah.
And I can teach you how to show up in a different way that does help to shift those dynamics. And in the process, every time I've done this with professionals in this regard, they end up getting such discoveries about themselves, right? And so this is how this started evolving. It's like clearing up our own stuff to show up as, the professional that the beneficiaries or our clients or our parties to mediation need.
Yeah.
And so the talk was basically was that how it only takes you, because I lived it. I felt it for myself when I started showing up differently in all my
Mhm.
relationships, including the father of my children, which, by the way, we go on vacations now. We have for years. Our divorce hit 11 years ago. You know, I started diving into mediation 10 years ago. And
Yeah.
so basically we get along great. And the relief it gave our daughters,
Yeah.
they were 13 at the time, now they're 26, it was amazing. And so, so that's what I spoke about, is that as professionals, we owe it to ourselves to live a happier, healthier life and clear whatever is holding us, maybe holding us back from that. But also it puts us in a higher level of presence and awareness when we are serving those that, we serve. What do our professional ethics talk about?
Mhm.
Serving in the client's best interest, serving
Correct.
in the beneficiary's best interest, serving in the party's best interest. That includes making sure we're fully present and not,
Yeah.
no, like, as you said aptly at the beginning, not bringing any baggage in that we may not even be aware of.
Correct. And people might not realize just how much responsibility trustees have. Like, for example, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the beneficiary, right? And to make sure you're protecting their interests. That you can find yourself as a trustee quickly in the middle of conflict because interests may collide. And then what do you do? So there's a lot of ethics that go into this.
Yeah.
So all the tips you were giving, these folks, including, by the way, so do you share your personal story quite broadly to help people when they're going? Because I didn't want to ask earlier about, well, where are you and your ex-husband now in terms of communication? Because maybe it was too personal. But do you share that 11 years ago it was one way, now it's completely transformed, and does that help people?
I do. That's a great question. I appreciate that. Yes, I do, and thank you for being sensitive to what the privacy around that might be. Right. But yes, I do share it, and I share it for two reasons. One, I think stories do help people to relate,
Absolutely.
because I've had a lot of people come up after they've heard me talk and say, "Wow, it same thing happened to me, or same thing happened to somebody I knew."
Yeah.
But also, so it's really walking my walk and talking my talk, because what I have found, and this is one of the things I teach in the program I've got, is that the storytelling is great, but there's a negative side to storytelling, and we've all probably either been that person or we've known somebody who's telling their story and they're worked up about it, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. When did that happen? And maybe it was 20 years ago or 5 years ago, like someone who hasn't really gotten over their divorce. Let's use that as an example.
Yeah.
Um, and they're still telling the same story about how they did this and this happened and all that, like it was yesterday. And the challenge with that, the problem with that, is that cortisol we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
When we relate a story that we haven't really fully processed and we're still getting triggered by, when we relate that, our body does not know the difference between the first time it happened, the real trauma that we experienced when
Yep.
cortisol was high, right? And the retelling. So we're just, raising our cortisol unnecessarily again and again and again. And we repeat these stories. They get on like some
Yeah.
soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
So when I tell my story, it might be with some effect or some kind of, inflection here or there. I mean, I don't make it over dramatic, to be honest, yeah, because it's because I really am over it. But when I share it very candidly. If I may, the rest of this story is in the city where we got divorced. Let's say Dallas, Texas. We I was this was the there was a clinic I was volunteering with at SMU just before the pandemic hit. And that case, we were down to the 11th hour. We had one thing to resolve. Everyone was spent, and the parties were spent, I should say. And we decided to have do a continuation. This was a clinic, right? So I was volunteering for this,
Yeah.
and we ended up finding a spot. Well, we couldn't get any clinic time, but one of the attorneys said, we can do it at my office next week. I said, great. Now, in these clinic situations, it's not unusual for you to just, I don't have a lot of background, and I know that I don't even know the attorneys. I haven't really connected necessarily. It's not the same as you might do a lot of research on everybody, right? Because you don't have a lot to
Yeah.
go on. And when she gave me her card, I said, "Oh, this is you're from such and such family law firm." She said,
Yeah.
"Yes." I said, "Do you know so and so?" And she said, "Yeah, that's my dad." Now, 11 hours before, I always open up my mediations
Yeah.
talking about, why we're here. It's a guided process, etc. And I give a little snippet. I said, I've gone through this myself. Everyone's story is different.
Yeah.
Everyone's situation is unique. But I became a mediator because I felt bullied and vulnerable, and really came away from this feeling hopeless. And that's why I mediate today, because I wanted to do it better. 11 hours later, I find out that the woman who's attorney for one of the parties is the daughter of the gentleman who was my mediator.
Uh,
And and that's why I said, she says, "Oh, how do you know him?" I said, "He was my mediator." And she just smiled because, it's like,
yeah.
okay. So practicing my own stress management stuff, right? Take a heart focused breath. And I just said, "Please give him my regards."
Hmm.
And she said, "He passed away 3 months ago."
Oh.
Now,
Hmm.
I just sat with that and said, I bet your dad was a formidable character, because what I had said before, right? She smiled and she said, "He was."
Yeah.
And I said, one thing I want to say is that during our mediation, it was 3 days. We had a 3-day mediation in Texas, which is kind of unusual.
Yeah.
Um, During the second day, we had to be together for 45 minutes on a phone call about a pension plan in the UK. Everybody in the room. And when we finished, we got that done like that, but we were still at odds with everything else. It was taking so long. We felt bleeding through so much, money trying to get this resolved. And I said to my then husband across the table, we're still very angry with each other, but we're both looking at each other going, "This is costing a fortune," and
Yeah.
said, "Could we just stay in the same room
Hmm.
and work out the rest of everything together?" And he said, "I'm fine with that." And his attorney said, "I'll talk to my client." But the mediator, your dad, said, "I'm fine with that too." Now, I didn't know anything about private joint caucus, all this, right? All these things that
Yeah.
are possible in mediation at the time. We got back in my private space, and my attorney said, "It's not going to happen." I said, "Why can't we be together?" And he literally did this.
Hmm.
"It takes longer,
Yeah.
and it's going to be more fees." And I broke down. And in that moment, that's when I felt so disheveled and everything. Now, this is going to be, my goodness, quick, think. 2013 to 2020, 7 years, 6, 7 years later,
Hmm.
I'm re-entering the same law office where my mediation took place to do this continuation for these other
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
And pull up in the same garage, walk in the same glass doors. Nothing had changed. Same pictures on the walls, everything. But you know what? Because I had processed all my stuff years before,
Yeah.
I wasn't triggered. I was able to show up for those people in a way that there's no distraction for myself.
Yeah.
And they settled. And the other attorney even said, "Wow, we just accomplished the impossible." They didn't think they could settle,
Oh.
and it was just, it was back in that conference room when we had that chat where we could have stayed in there. We,
Same
back,
conference room.
but, so that, I mean, when you talk about stories,
Yeah.
and how private it gets, I don't share that often, but I think this audience, especially attorneys and mediators, can relate. And any other professional that I'm talking about, hoping to be able to help, something like this for themselves. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the rest of that story.
yeah. Well, no, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a good story to close things out because it shows that, what you were talking about when it comes to clearing up your own issues that might cause you to be triggered, it worked on you, right? You resolved your own issues when it was, pertaining to your divorce, but then we're able to walk into the same exact place where, same conference room, by the way, is that
Yes,
okay?
there were the two private rooms and then
Yeah,
the joint room.
yeah,
So yeah, I was in the two private rooms. and then the joint room. And we
Yeah.
were able to bring everybody in back to the joint room, which was great. But yeah, the same exact spaces. But I can tell the story,
Yeah.
but my cortisol's not, I'm not telling it like, and then, you know, it's,
Yeah.
but I used to tell my story in a way that would keep me riled up because I just didn't know. We're
Yeah.
not taught this stuff in school. MBA programs don't teach us this. Society
Exactly.
doesn't teach us this, but
Exactly.
it's not complex. It's not that hard to learn. You just got to know how.
Yeah, when that's what you're here for. And so it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a lawyer or a mediator or any professional, even a trustee, somebody who deals in the world of conflict, you have to make sure that you clear up your own and make peace with it and address it in a way that's going to not let you get triggered by it. That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
And so, thank you so much, Dana Garnett, for today's talk. And anything else you want to share, which please share how people can get a hold of you if they want to follow up.
Absolutely. They can check out my website. Another way, if you want to really reach me quickly, if you will, please connect me on LinkedIn and send me a message. And what I usually do is respond with a link to my calendar. We can have a chat to see, what's your situation is and whether, I'm the right person to help. So that's also a good way to reach me is through LinkedIn.
Yes, yes. No, I love LinkedIn, and that's where we recently connected as well.
Yes, yes, indeed,
So,
indeed.
all
So
right. All right, guys. So that's mindfulstrategy.com with Dana. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Don't be a stranger. You're always welcome back. We love these conversations to be ongoing. And, we love series and multiple parts. And so you're, quite the speaker on these things. And I appreciate everything that you've done in this field and looking forward to staying in contact.
thank you, Mac. I so appreciate you too and what you do in this work and getting the message out about mediation and how it really can transform the world. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right.